got some context within to judge whether I'm trustworthy or not. A lot of this is based on noticing things. You know, when you have a blog, you start to notice more. You go, well, that's interesting. I might write about that. I might blog about that. I might take a photograph of that. And if you do a good job of that, other people will go, well, that's interesting. And either rebroadcast it in the sense of a retweet or put it on their blog, or they will comment and they will push back. You will trigger some interest. And these are networks of people collectively finding things interesting. And they're doing so through the hyperlink, which has got slightly corrupted into the Facebook like button or the Google plus button. But basically, hyperlinks allow us to point to things, to be able to go, that's interesting. That person knows what they're talking about. This is what we did the last time. And we're building up these networks of pointing to the interesting stuff. And then you have tools like RSS, which allows you to subscribe to feeds of interesting things. So I subscribe to individual bloggers or news agencies or whatever else into a tool that lets me very quickly scan a whole range of different bits of information. So these are the sort of building blocks, if you like, that this is all based on. As are hashtags. Again, I was just saying hashtags were a friend of mine, Chris Messina, when Twitter first started, we literally just had the 140 characters. The @ sign didn't exist. It became a convention that we adopted as users. And likewise, Chris thought, wouldn't it be useful to be able to tag content as being about something? So the idea of the hashtag came about. And here we are, nearly 6 years later, with hashtags appearing on hoardings next to motorways or film captions, whatever. Quite bizarre. But it's basically able just to identify a topic in a very free-form, user-driven way. What I think all this is meaning is we're sort of pulling apart an industrialized approach to communication. You know, we've professionalized things to a ridiculous degree. You know, marketing own the communication outwardly, communications teams own the communication inwardly. And we've sort of forgotten how to talk to each other. We've forgotten how to communicate with each other because, we're not doing it the way the professionals say we should do it, or it's not our job, we're not meant to be doing it. You still see lots of examples with the social web where people are beginning to find their own voice and talk for themselves, being told off by the professionals because they're not meant to be doing it or doing it that way. And a lot of it is, we talked in the early days in blogging about finding our voice, about finding the way that we found comfortable to express ourselves out into these networks. And I think this is what's true of individuals who engage with these platforms. You need to begin to find your voice. And I think it's one of the biggest hurdles. And again, we've been talking this morning about people paying sometimes huge amounts of money for platforms, technology, to enable all this stuff, but doing nothing to address the challenge of people being asked, really for the first time, to find their voice, to say what they think, even in an internal setting. You know, again, there are lots of repressive forces, if you like. You know, who are you to say that? It's not your job to say that make people unwilling to open up. And just a concrete example, I remember once watching our HR director in the BBC taking part on our internal live forum. So here's a chap who's responsible for lots of very heavyweight legislation and procedural stuff, who's used to having his written word fact-checked by whole teams. And he's watching incoming questions to the forum, goes into a huddle with his senior team to decide which questions they can answer and which they can't. He voices the answer, which is then typed in by an assistant. And he then starts arguing with the assistant with what she said because it wasn't what he'd meant to say. And this thing goes out into this network inside the BBC. So it was fascinating watching him struggling with coming to terms with a written communication that's also conversational, that's personal, that's social, and where the line lay. It makes you stop to think, if I'm going to write something in my blog, why am I writing it? What am I wanting to say? And people, one of the biggest reasons for not doing this is they're too busy. They have too many conventional processes they're burdened with. But I'm arguing to some of the senior folks that I coach, having the reason to stop banging your head against a brick wall for 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes a week, 5 minutes a month is worthwhile. Why are we doing this? What's interesting? What's working? What's not? And there are lots of companies aspire to be thought leaders in their fields. But how can you be a thought leader when nobody knows what you think? These platforms give you the chance to be visible. And the almost existential thing about, well, what do I think, becomes an issue. What do I stand for? What am I prepared to stick out there and have people react to? And David Weinberger, in the early days of blogging, called it writing ourselves into existence. And it's this really powerful tool to be able to think, compose, put in words what's in your head, and then stick it out into the world and see what happens. Do people agree? Do they disagree? Do I care if they agree or disagree? Does that modify my thinking in any way? Very, very powerful process. And if you do this over a period of time, you leave a trace. And one of the knowledge management things was capturing knowledge. I used to love the language about how do you capture knowledge? Or extracting knowledge, which was another favourite. Knowledge harvesting was another one. It sounds like some cerebral milking machine that sucks the good stuff out of staff's heads and then leaves these empty husks. Whatever. If you use these tools, you do leave a trace of what your thinking was and why you did what you did. So when I left the BBC, I left behind a lot of trails, a lot of tracks, a lot of written, visible thinking about my experience and possibly the value that it had in a way that was never possible before. Once you have this inside your organisation, people then fret about the messiness of it, the disorganised nature of it, apparently disorganised nature of it. And it became apparent to me that what I was seeing happening inside my organisation was the equivalent of old villages. This is one in the Cotswolds in England, which grow up haphazardly over a long period of time, with nobody predetermining the architectural style or saying you all have to have red roofs or whatever, and they've got meandering paths. But they're easy to navigate because they're human. They feel navigable. You can contextualise where you go and why you're going there. Most IT systems are like new towns. This is Milton Keynes in the UK, which is notorious for people getting lost in it. Now, it's very sensible. It's got lots of straight roads and roundabouts and signposts, but we can't map to it. We can't relate to it. So these apparently straggly, messy tools paradoxically end up being more navigable than those that people have invested effort in making tidy. And then people worry about the signal to noise. There's all this rubbish. I actually think we need more rubbish because we've got so good at keeping the rubbish out of our systems that we've ended up saying nothing. There's no signal. It's all so tidy that it's not actually conveying anything to other people. So you have to overcome that by encouraging everybody to just start saying more, start thinking more, start expressing more. And you approach this in a incremental way. The mice are there for a lovely idea from a British academic which we adopted, which is Trojan mice. Lots of small things that don't need to cost an awful lot of money or require too many people to give you permission, but which in aggregate become something productive and useful. So again, do these things in small steps. And a saying from the American Marines, which we actually adopted in my team, which is keep moving, stay in touch, and head for the high ground. Have a rough idea of where you're heading with this stuff. Keep doing things and keep talking about what you're doing. And you will end up somewhere robust quite quickly. Don't over-strategize, don't be over-cautious, don't over-plan. And I think the biggest challenge people are facing at the moment is that it's become trendy to get into social media. So lots of people have got this external, often marketing team-led thing, but internally they're still operating in ways that have been around for 50, 100 years. And there's a real gap between those two. And I think this is one of the imperatives of organizations. They have to begin to think in these ways and adopt these ways of working. Otherwise, it's just going to get painful. Because the inside is becoming the outside. The blurring between the two and the impact that that has on brand. Controlling brands is becoming a very different game than what it's been for the past 20, 30 years. It's about these conversations. Quick story before I finish. I have a bag, a crumpler bag that I use to travel with, and it's got a very thick strap. And I undid the strap to lengthen it, but then couldn't work out how to redo the bloody thing. So I'm flapping my way around the world's airports, annoying other passengers. And then a couple of years ago, Crumpler UK started following me on Twitter for some reason, better known to themselves. So when I saw them there, I said, well, seeing as you're there, can you explain how to relace my bag strap? Whoever it was had a brave attempt in 140 characters, failed miserably. And I said, look, I'm none the wiser. So they said, okay, give me an hour or so. An hour or so later, they sent me a link to a sequence of photographs on Flickr that showed me the different steps to take to relace my bag strap. Sorted. Happy punter. So I start tweeting and blogging about this, promoting Crumpler UK. A year later, the zip went on the bag. So I go back looking for my friend at Crumpler and got no response. Now, whether they'd been sacked for using Twitter at work or well, I don't know. But the point of the story was that they had set up this relationship and in a sense an obligation with me, which they then let down. I have then felt that they'd cut off this connection that we'd built. And I think in that story you have the different elements of what's powerful about this stuff. And the last one, and this is my sort of squishy last slide, is that, again, David Weinberger said that the thing that makes the internet hang together isn't technology, isn't internet protocols. It's love. It's the basic human desire to be connected to each other. And that's what we're seeing in Facebook. And that's what I think organizations that do something worthwhile that people get passionate about have an enormous opportunity to tap into. People want to be passionate, they want to care, and they want to be connected. And really, for the first time, these tools give you as organizations the opportunity to do that. So on that note, I will stop. Thank you very much.